Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me. You're listening to the account with a report for day 407 of the war in Ukraine. Today I have one investigative article I want to point out. All other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and the international developments. Before we start, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. Russian sources claim that they captured the center of Bakhmut, while Ukrainian sources claim Ukrainian soldiers are still operating in the center. Most likely, Russia is once again claiming a contested area as captured. We will see over the next days how the situation develops. Fact is that Russia is still slowly advancing inside the city. This video shared on social media shows the current weather conditions around Bakhmut. Due to the mud, mechanized warfare is almost impossible. Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner PMC, has admitted that the Ukrainian armed forces are not retreating from the city of Bakhmut. A Russian offensive is out of the question, he stated. Avdiivka. There were reports that Ukrainian soldiers have the momentum north of Novobakhmutivka and Novoselivka. Considering that yesterday Ukraine managed to push Russian forces back north of Novoselivka, this claim seemed to be true. There were further reports that between Novobakhmutivka and Krasnohorivka, the situation is deteriorating for Russian forces. North of Spartak, Ukraine managed to make small gains, relieving pressure on Avdiivka. Novaya Gazeta Europe released an article today discussing the front lines and what to expect over the next days. Take this with a grain of salt, as they do not name their source. The source referenced claims the situation is as follows. According to the reports from the line of engagement, Russian units are now pulling out from the north salient near Avdiivka. Fighting is underway for the control of Novoselivka, but Ukraine is not trying to assault the village as of now, they are more signaling their presence. The south salient near the village of Vodyane is still holding up, but Russians may retreat from there in the next 2 days. The Vuhledar positions are abandoned. A 10-kilometer grey zone lies there now. The Russian forces are withdrawing to Volnovaha. They are still holding the line in Marinka, but there are not many troops. As for Bakhmut, the Ukrainian army, since last night, has begun recapturing the central quarters previously captured by the Wagner fighters. They are moving ahead slowly but steadily. It seems like the Russians are preparing to withdraw from the areas to the north and south of Bakhmut. And to start the news segment, the investigative article I wanted to mention. Russian investigative project Vashny Istory, referencing data of the pension fund and the Register of Disabled People, found that at least 8,000 Russian volunteers, including recruits, may have died in the war against Ukraine. The journalist tried to count the number of the Russian volunteers who were only equated to the status of contractors in November, relying on the open data about the survivors' pension payments. According to the information of the Pensions Fund, as of January 1, 2023, 1,430 persons received the survivors' pensions. It is a lot more than before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Vashny Istory counted that almost 9,000 likely received pension from the pension fund in connection with the death of their family members in Ukraine. Thus, almost 9,000 survivors' pension receivers may be evidence of 8,000 deceased volunteer soldiers. It is stressed that the real number of deceased volunteers can be a lot higher, since only the data about the people who were able to go through all bureaucratic institutions in order to apply for the pension were added to the statistics. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. On the anniversary of the liberation of Chernihiv Oblast, General Valery Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, has thanked the soldiers who participated. Andriy Sybiha, one of President Volodymyr Zelensky's advisors, stated in an interview that Ukraine would be ready to discuss the future of Crimea once Ukrainian forces reach its borders. Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, on the other hand, categorically denied that Ukraine will make any territorial concessions, including negotiating about the fate of Crimea. Ukroboronprom has announced that the NATO country who agreed to a joint project for the manufacturing of 125mm tank ammunition is Poland. On April 5, 2023, Ukrainian and Polish railway operators launched a test run on the 1,435mm European gauge line between Lublin and Rawa-Ruska. As a reminder, Ukraine's railway network runs on the 1,520mm gauge, which has been the standard during the Soviet Union. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. Several loud explosions were reported in occupied Melitopol overnight. A Russian military base near an airfield was hit. In the evening, explosions were once again reported in Melitopol. According to research by Brady Afric, foreign and defense policy research analyst at the American Enterprise Institute, Russian forces in Crimea have moved military equipment from their bases to the north of occupied Crimea over the past month. Petr Andrioschenko, the advisor to the Mariupol mayor, reported that Russia has begun to clear areas around the Azovstal steelworks in order to build fortifications. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Russia currently has 14 warships on active combat duty in the Black Sea. 4 of them are missile carriers with a total salvo of 24 cruise missiles. The Russian ruble has fallen to its lowest levels since April last year. Belaruski Hayun, an independent Belarusian military monitoring media outlet, reported that 3 MiG-31K fighter jets have taken off from Belarus for Russia. The Russian Volunteer Corps, who claims to fight on the side of Ukraine, claimed to have performed combat missions in Bryansk Oblast again. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The US Department of Defense has signed a $27.1 million contract with the American company General Dynamics Land Systems (GDLS), presumably to manufacture M1A1 Abrams tanks for Ukraine. The Swedish prosecutor's office, which is investigating the blast at the Nord Stream pipeline connecting Russia and Germany via the Baltic Sea, announced its main version of the incident. Prosecutors say a state-sponsored group is behind the explosion. French President Emmanuel Macron has urged Chinese President Xi Jinping to reason with Russia and help end the Ukraine war. However, Chinese President Xi Jinping showed no sign of changing his position on Russia's war in Ukraine. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, stated that she warned Xi Jinping not to arm Russia with Chinese weapons, and that the Chinese leader also said he would call Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky when conditions and time are right. The FBI Director Christopher Wray said that China is learning from the Russian-Ukrainian war, which could serve as a clue to potential future actions against Taiwan. And now for the Intelligence Report segment, starting as usual with the UK Ministry of Defense. As claimed on Russian social media, the Russian MOD has highly likely dismissed Colonel General Rustam Muradov as commander of the Eastern Group of Forces, EGF, in Ukraine. The EGF under Muradov has suffered exceptionally heavy casualties in recent months, as it poorly conceived assaults repeatedly failed to capture the Donetsk Oblast town of Vuhledar. The operations attracted intense public criticism from across the spectrum of Russian commentators, including Muradov's own troops. Muradov took over the EGF after its disastrous attempt to assault Kyiv from the northwest during the initial full-scale invasion. He is the most senior Russian military dismissal of 2023 so far, but more are likely as Russia continues to fail to achieve its objectives in the Donbas. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The main topics of today's assessment are: Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukrainian forces will withdraw from Bakhmut to avoid encirclement if necessary, but do not yet assess the need to do so. Russian President Vladimir Putin framed Russia's efforts to consolidate control of occupied territories of Ukraine as a matter of internal security and rule of law during a meeting with the Russian National Security Council on April 5th. Putin also attempted to portray Russia as a respected world power against the backdrop of Chinese officials downplaying close relations with Russia. The Kremlin is likely increasingly struggling to maintain loyalty among lower-level regional authorities as it continues to place the onus on funding the war on Russian federal subjects. Putin dismissed Colonel General Nikolai Grechushkin from his post as deputy head of the Ministry of Emergency Situations on April 5th. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko arrived in Moscow on April 5th to meet with Putin and will meet with the Supreme Council of the Russia-Belarus Union State on April 6th. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy continues to focus its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka areas. During the day, thanks to the courage of each soldier, more than 20 attacks of invaders were repelled. The most intense fighting continues for the settlements of Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka. In the Liman direction, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the area of Spirne. In the direction of Bakhmut, the enemy continues to conduct offensive actions, tries to take full control of the city of Bakhmut. Fierce battles continue. During the day, the enemy conducted unsuccessful offensive actions in the areas of Orihovo-Vasilivka and Bodanivka settlements. The units of the defense forces repelled about 10 enemy attacks on the indicated section of the front. In the Avdiivka and Marinka directions, the enemy carried out offensive actions in the areas of Novokalinove, Siverne, Pervomaiske and Marinka without success. The fiercest battles in the indicated area continue for Marinka, where 13 enemy attacks were repulsed. In the Zaporizhia and Kherson directions, the enemy continues to build up defensive lines and positions in terms of fortification. The Russian occupying forces continue to suffer huge losses in manpower. Local medical facilities in the temporarily occupied territories are fully loaded. In one of the settlements of the Simferopol district of the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea, a tent town for wounded Russian invaders was noted. As of April 4th of this year, there are about 100 enemy servicemen undergoing rehabilitation in the mentioned field camp. And with that, the report is finished. Should you be interested in details, you can find links to every article I mention in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.